Dakota bow hunt started off in November of 2022. I picked up an over-the-counter tag. My wife and I went off to North Dakota for about 4 days to bow hunt before the rifle season came in. And I was unsuccessful. The weather was unseasonably warm. It was in the 70s some days. And then I went to Illinois for the first gun hunt. Took a doe, didn't see any mature bucks on that trip. That I was really craving another big buck opportunity, so I was looking at the forecast, and as you remember, right before Christmas, Winter Storm Diaz ripped through across the northern U.S. and through the Midwest and even through the East, brought tons of snow.
You know that one saying, here goes nothing? Well, this is an impromptu trip to North Dakota. I have a license that I did not fill back in November. It's now the week before Christmas, and our nation got absolutely hammered by snow over the last 48 hours. I think my wife and I shoveled like 3 times, so I'm sick of shoveling, ready to go deer hunting. And sub-zero temperatures are gonna follow this big snowstorm, so deep snow, cold temperatures, it sounds like big bucks to me, hoping for a big one out in North Dakota.
As I was arriving into the Fargo area, I hit a really icy patch on I-94, and it kind of freaked me out, and that's where I decided to spend the night. And then drove further to reach my destination, which is where I had bow hunted in November as well as the previous year in September. So I was familiar with this area. I know that when weather turns so cold, deer have to feed. They have to get on their feet to stay warm. And so I was excited about this prospect of bow hunting in just some of the coldest weather that I've ever hunted in. As I got there, I did some scouting, and I noticed a lot of deer sign on the southern fringe of this piece of public land.
All over the place.
Now that was encouraging, but the problem was if I was to actually hunt on the public land, the deer would be downwind where they were traveling through on this little 2-track.
I just got permission to put a setup on the edge of this wildlife management area. The landowner that butts right up to it, it's a better setup to intercept these deer as they come off from the public. And I know a lot of people might be against baiting. I'm kind of neutral on it. It's not my preferred tactic. I don't even actually like sitting stationary, but when it's late season and really cold like this, I need a high percentage shot at point blank range, 20 yards and in, to make sure that I can make a good shot with all the warm gear on and all that stuff. So I'm going to try to set up a blind, a camera, and I'm going to dump some corn out. So I don't know, lots of deer around, just a matter of if I can get a big buck to come into it. So that's the strategy.
So I was gonna hike in there with some corn, ground blind, but I noticed there were already deer on the south end of that piece of public. So I backed out and decided to come in mid-morning the next morning when I figured the deer would be bedded down. That night I had an idea that, the only way I was gonna be able to hunt this spot was from a ground blind. There was absolutely no trees. So what I did was I went to a Walmart and picked up a bunch of white fleece, a pair of fabric shears, and some zip ties. So in my motel room, I actually fabricated a blind cover, a snow cover, I'm calling it. Well, it worked. The deer started hitting the corn right away, and it wasn't long and I started getting pictures of a tremendous bodied buck. He was only a 7-pointer. He had broken off a brow tine, but he was heavy, and he just had that pot belly, even despite all the rutting he had done in the cold conditions. And I knew that after a few days, or a couple of days even, if I hadn't gotten a picture of a larger buck, he would be the one that I wanted to target. Now the weather is looking like it's going to turn even worse within a couple of days, and Christmas is coming, and I don't want to miss Christmas with my family. So it's like, okay, this big 7-pointer, he's the guy I'm going to target. So I looked at the forecast and talked to my wife, and it looked literally like this, I was going to have one chance to hunt. I hadn't sat yet, just because, I was waiting to see what I could all turn up for bucks. And here it is. I've got literally one day, and then I got to get on the road to make it home for Christmas. So it's December 21st, and after that, the weather's just going to be, 40 plus mile an hour gusts, more snow coming. So I knew that buck was regular. He was coming in the morning around 9 a.m. and also in the afternoons well before dark. So that afternoon, I walked into the blind with all my gear and I got sweated up because you had to be dressed super warm just to survive out in the cold. But I did work up a sweat, so when I got to the blind, I had to take off a couple layers to, to let the perspiration evaporate.
So at about 11 o'clock and right around noon, they were showing a peak of movement activity, and there were deer on the feed when I was coming out here. And then the second activity time for the evening is from about 15 minutes from now until dark.
It wasn't long after I got settled back in and got my new release tested out and made sure it was fine that some does started coming in, and again, it was right when whitetail activity forecast said that the movement was going to pick up. So I was pretty confident, and what I had done when I set up the blind is I left the windows totally closed because I wanted the deer to really accept that blind fast. And then what I did when I went to hunt that afternoon is I took some paracord and basically made a diamond shaped opening, so it was like just wide enough that I could get an arrow out and film. I didn't want to open it wide open so the deer would see the big dark, abyss. And pretty soon, a really nice buck that I also had on my trail camera came in. He was a nice heavy 3.5-year-old 8-pointer. He had a broken G2, and I said, that's not my buck. That's not the one I'm shooting. So I was sitting there watching these deer. This buck was feeding. Another few deer came and tried to get in by the corn, and then eventually a young buck scampered by. I mean, he was within probably 10 or 12 yards. Figured it was about time that the big 7 was going to show up, and that's exactly what happened. I'm sitting there and he rolled right into view, right framed perfectly in that little window opening, and his body was huge. His hindquarters were huge. I mean, he was obviously the boss. He came in kind of bristled up. He was obviously irritated toward that other buck. I drew back and I held at full draw for probably almost a minute, if not a little bit longer than that. And I'm thinking, like, he's got to turn, because as soon as I drew back, he had turned with his butt right toward me. And I thought, man, this is tough holding that full draw. But I kept my cool. I stayed pretty calm through it all and didn't get real shaky or anything. I was just super focused. Like, I knew I was going to get this deer. I just had to keep it together. And finally, he turned, and he was at such a perfect quartering away angle.
Yes. 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 I love bow hunting. Oh my gosh. I am frozen. Holy smokes. That's bow hunting in 20 below zero weather. When he came in, there was no question his body was just so much bigger than the others, and I absolutely crushed him. Feels good. It's been a long bow season. Really long bow season.
With the conditions being what they were, I had to get out of the blind and start getting this recovery done, because I knew that, field dressing the deer and dragging them 700 yards out was going to be a huge chore, especially given the wind speed, the coldness.
There he is. For late season. What a body. Absolutely a monster bodied deer. He has good mass on the beams, but he just doesn't have that huge rack you'd expect. A tremendously huge body for post-rut. I mean, it's a few days before Christmas, and he's just swollen up huge. The rest is pretty self-explanatory. Happy to be taking home an absolute bruiser buck.
And with much effort, I got that deer out. I can't tell you how extreme the drifting and the wind was at that point.
Camera battery died on the Sony, and that just happened.
I'm not exaggerating the details. I was scared for my life, so I knew I had to be focused. I knew I couldn't get scared. I knew I had to focus on the job at hand and see it to completion and get that deer in the truck. So I finally did that, and I was so relieved and so just thankful that everything came together. Now, HuntStand plays a big role in a hunt like this. Not only was I able to gather the information for the landowner through the property info layer and figure out where he lived and get permission to hunt that property, but also features like the whitetail activity forecast telling me the best time to be in the blind. And another thing is hunt zone. It was really, really handy to be able to find exactly where my blind was and pop that hunt zone feature open and look at it and see exactly what my wind would be doing. HuntStand Pro Whitetail is just a huge benefit in a situation like that. Highly suggest that if you're on hunting lease or something like that. It's good. It's especially beneficial for a DIY hunt like what I did. So that's about it for my North Dakota hunt. Hope you enjoyed it.